Have you ever wondered what true friendship looks like? Not just the kind you see in movies, but the real, messy, beautiful kind that lasts a lifetime. I want to tell you a story about that. It's the story of 6 friends: Alex, Maya, Ben, Chloe, Liam, and Noah. They grew up together in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and their bond was forged in the fires of childhood adventures and teenage dreams. Their story really begins one summer, the last one before they were all supposed to scatter for college. Alex, the unofficial leader, was the dreamer. He had this grand idea to start a band. He wasn't the best musician, but his passion was infectious. Maya was the artist, always sketching in her notebook, capturing moments the rest of them might have missed. Ben was the quiet observer, the tech whiz who could fix anything from a broken amp to a broken heart with his calm logic. Chloe was the firecracker, the one with a laugh that could fill a room and an opinion on everything. Liam was the athlete, always in motion, his energy pushing the group forward. And then there was Noah, the storyteller, the one who found the magic in their ordinary lives and wove it into tales that made them all feel like heroes. That summer, they poured all their energy into Alex's band project. They called themselves The Last Summer. It was cheesy, but it was theirs. They practiced in Alex's garage, the air thick with the smell of old gasoline and new ambitions. They were terrible at first. Chloe's singing was off-key, Liam's drumming was more enthusiastic than rhythmic, and Alex's guitar solos often ended in a screech of feedback. Ben would patiently tweak the soundboard. Maya would design their non-existent album cover, and Noah would write lyrics that were surprisingly profound for a bunch of teenagers. They fought, of course. They argued over chord progressions, over who was hogging the microphone, over whose turn it was to buy snacks. There was one particularly huge fight where Chloe accused Alex of being a dictator, and Liam nearly broke his drumsticks in frustration. The garage fell silent, the tension so thick you could cut it with a guitar pick. For a moment, it felt like the end. But then, Maya quietly held up a sketch she'd been working on. It was a drawing of all of them, mid-argument, but with little cartoon hearts floating above their heads. It was so ridiculous, so perfectly them, that they all started laughing. And just like that, the tension broke. They realized their friendship was bigger than any disagreement. That night, they wrote their best song yet. Their big debut was at the annual town fair. They were squeezed between a piting contest and a prize-winning pig. They were nervous wrecks. Alex's hands were shaking so much he could barely hold his pick. But when they got on that makeshift stage and saw their families and half the town watching, something clicked. They looked at each other, took a deep breath, and played. They weren't perfect, but they played with heart. And when they finished their last song, the one they wrote after their big fight, the crowd erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was genuine, heartfelt cheering. In that moment, they weren't just 6 kids in a garage. They were a band. They were a unit. They had created something together. As the summer ended, the reality of their departure set in. The farewells were tough. There were tears, tight hugs, and promises to stay in touch that they all knew would be hard to keep. They went their separate ways, to different cities and different lives. Alex went to business school, determined to learn how to turn his dreams into reality. Maya went to art school in a bustling city. Ben dove into computer science. Chloe pursued theater. Liam got a sports scholarship. And Noah studied literature, continuing to hone his craft of storytelling. The first few years were a blur of texts, late-night calls, and occasional holiday visits. Life got busy. They started new careers, fell in and out of love, and made new friends. The group chat became quieter. The calls became less frequent. It seemed like the prophecy of their band name, The Last Summer, was coming true. The distance wasn't just geographical anymore. It was emotional. They were drifting, pulled apart by the currents of their individual lives. Each of them felt it, a quiet ache for a time when their worlds were small enough to fit inside a single garage. About 5 years after they left, Alex got a call. It was Chloe. Her voice was strained. Her father had passed away suddenly. Without a second thought, Alex dropped everything. He called Ben, who called Maya, who called Liam, who called Noah. Within 48 hours, all 5 of them were back in their hometown, standing on Chloe's doorstep. They didn't know what to say, so they just hugged her. They stayed for the funeral, cooking meals, sharing stories of her dad, and just being present. They didn't try to fix her grief, they just sat with her in it. Being back together, surrounded by the familiar sights of their hometown, felt surreal. The old dynamics clicked back into place instantly. One evening, after a long and emotional day, they found themselves back at Alex's old house. His parents had kept the garage mostly the same. The old, dusty instruments were still there, leaning against the wall like sleeping giants. On a whim, Liam sat down at the drum kit. Ben fiddled with the ancient amp. Alex picked up his guitar. They looked at each other, a silent question passing between them. Then, they started to play. It was rusty and out of tune, but it was them. They played their old songs, the sound echoing through the quiet night. It wasn't a performance, it was a prayer, a way to process the grief, the years apart, and the joy of being reunited. In that moment, they weren't just friends who had drifted apart. They were a family, reconnected by tragedy, but held together by a love that time and distance couldn't erase. That reunion was a turning point. They realized what they had almost lost. They made a new pact, not just to stay in touch, but to be actively present in each other's lives. They created a shared digital space, not just for memes, but for real-life updates. The good, the bad, the boring. Maya designed a logo for them, a stylized tree with 6 intertwined roots. Ben built a private website for them to share photos and journals. They started an annual tradition, a week-long trip every summer, a nod to their last one together. On one of these trips, 10 years after that first summer, they found themselves on a beach at sunset. Alex, now a successful entrepreneur, was talking about a new venture. Maya, a celebrated artist, was sketching the waves. Ben was showing off an app he'd developed. Chloe was recounting a hilarious story from a recent acting gig. Liam, a coach, was organizing a game of beach volleyball. And Noah, now a published author, was just watching them all, a smile on his face. Later that night, around a bonfire, Noah pulled out a worn notebook. He told them he'd been writing their story. Not just the story of the last summer, but the whole story. The drifting apart, the coming back together, the quiet ways they'd supported each other through career changes, heartbreaks, and celebrations. He read a passage aloud, his voice steady in the flickering light. It was a story about how friendship isn't about never changing or never being apart. It's about building a foundation so strong that no matter how far you roam, you always have a place to come home to. It's about showing up. It's about weathering the silences and celebrating the noise. As he finished, there was a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling fire and the sound of the waves. They looked at each other, their faces illuminated by the flames. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic speeches. There was just a shared understanding, a quiet gratitude for this incredible, unbreakable thing they had built together. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It was a testament to the fact that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. They're the people who know your history, who stand by you in the present, and who you can't imagine a future without. They were Alex, Maya, Ben, Chloe, Liam, and Noah. They were 6 friends. They were family, and their song was far from over. Thanks for listening to their story. What does friendship mean to you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the connections that shape our lives. See you next time.